For most of our nation's history, when a presidency comes to an end, the president's White House departure has been a mundane process. There are bags and boxes to pack, letters to compose, goodbyes to White House staff and to the permanent staff of the residence, you know, the people who've looked after you and your family for 4 or 8 years. There's also the matter of sorting out what goes with you to your home, your library, your presidential foundation, and what stays behind as the property of the American people. That process under President Obama and his then Vice President, Joe Biden, is now under scrutiny. But not in the way it would be 4 years later, when Trump would lead the White House, only reluctantly after losing his bid for a second term and only after an attempted coup. And it is that seditious exit that makes the difference between the Biden paper scandal and the Trump catastrophe so glaring. The difference, in fact, is as stark as the difference between the two men. In Biden's case, a handful of documents with classified markings were found at his D.C. private office, as well as his private home in Delaware. And when an aide with the proper clearances did a more thorough search, additional items were found. These items were not even missed by the National Archives. In fact, it was the Biden team that alerted them that they were missing it all. In Trump's case, we're talking not only about top secret material, including information on the nuclear capability of a still unnamed country, but also a year and a half of obstruction that was so blatant and so aggressive, a judge wound up issuing a search warrant for Trump's home, which doubles as a paid golf club. This is the difference between misplacing a friend's car keys and stealing their car. The U.S. media may be unable to help themselves for clamoring for a chance to both sides these presidents. But you really can't compare these two cases without considering the plot to overturn the election. And joining me now is Joyce Vance, former U.S. attorney and professor at the University of Alabama School of Law, and Democratic strategist James Carville. And James Carville, I do want to start with you because right now there are some stories talking about the annoyance of the president at some sloppiness of aides that did this and some annoyance of Democrats at the White House because this is happening at all. Because, you know, there is the sense, and maybe it's a sense of people like myself, that blurring these two stories will blunt the Justice Department's will when it comes to acting, when it comes to Trump. What do you think?
Well, first of all, I want to congratulate you for pointing out that the national press can't help but make fools of themselves. It happened in Whitewater, it happened in the email scandal, and this happening now. I can't stop these people. It's my anointed job in the world to stop the national press from making a fool of itself. The White House response should be this and only this. The president is cooperating fully with the special counsel. He expects everyone in his administration to do the same. End of story. No Corvettes. No, it was in this box or that box. We're thoroughly doing this. Yeah. The special counsel has an investigation to run. President Biden has a country to run. Get on with it. You're not going to stop these people from making fools of themselves. I promise you, Joy. You can try. I congratulate you. But I got more experience in this than most people. It's not going to work. No.
Well, maybe I just have PTSD from her emails. You know, I mean, Joyce, It feels like there's a but her emails quality to this, to me, because the thing is that what you had with Trump was so blatant. And I can't stress enough, we're talking about withholding classified documents after attempting not to leave office at all. We're talking about somebody who attempted to stay in office and did so with the help of an armed vanguard that busted into the Capitol, shat on the floor, and beat up police officers, leaving 5 people dead, including one among them. And so I feel like when you look at the context of that, this is somebody who didn't want to leave office and then did everything he could and directed his aides on things to take. Let me play Rudy Giuliani real quick. This is Rudolph Giuliani saying that in the beginning stage of the administration, he told him, take classified documents. Take a listen.
I was vetting other people when he first became president and their tax returns. He had some very rich people, and they had some very big tax returns.
Oh, my goodness.
Listen to this. This is my training on top secret. I didn't take him out of Mar-a-Lago. He told me, take him home with you. I'm not going to take Wilbur Ross's tax returns home with me. I could misplace them.
You can say whatever you want about Joe Biden. I highly doubt he has that kind of cavalier attitude toward classified documents, Joyce. So in your mind, do you discern a difference in these two cases?
So I think there's obviously a big difference. And as you point out, Joy, it emanates from the different approaches that these two men had for governing. One has enormous respect for the Constitution and the rule of law, and the other one doesn't. In terms of the two cases, they each get judged on their facts. And again, I think you're correct to point out that there are some fine line subtleties here. And Republicans have certainly tried to make the two cases comparable in a way that might blunt their impact. But when prosecutors look at these cases, and these are career prosecutors, we have on the one hand in the Biden case, a Trump-appointed Republican United States attorney from Maryland. Ironically, in the case of the Trump investigation, we also have someone who served as an acting U.S. attorney for part of the Trump administration. So there are reasons to have confidence, I guess, in both cases, if you're a Republican, in the integrity of those investigations. And the standout difference is a trajectory of obstruction of justice. Trump even went so far in court pleadings in the 11th Circuit to claim that the documents in his possession were his, that they were his personal items, that he was entitled to keep them. And that's a sharp contrast to Joe Biden. We may ultimately learn that there was sloppiness. There may even be more documents that turn up in the course of the investigation. What's absent is a willful intent to retain those documents illegally. And that's what the dividing line between prosecution and no prosecution, that's where that line is.
But, you know, and James, and I totally agree with that and totally understand that Joyce is so great at explaining these things and talking me down. But I remember that same set of facts being true for Hillary Clinton. And the attitude was, this is a chance to get her. And what at least it felt like to me was that James Comey buckled to that pressure, and 11 days out from an election and then 3 days out from an election felt like he needed to act in a way that ultimately was political. This is James Comer, and he is the chairman of the Oversight Committee. Let you listen to what he has said about this.
We don't know exactly what Trump has versus what Biden has. At the end of the day, my biggest concern isn't the classified documents, to be honest with you. My concern is how there's such a discrepancy in how former President Trump was treated.
We do know what Trump has. We know a lot of what Trump has. We do not know what Biden has. But he's now been, at least he's been honest. His concern is there's a discrepancy in how former President Trump was treated. This is all about revenge for the search of Mar-a-Lago, the end.
Well, I'm hardly Joyce Mance. When I actually graduated from law school, but I don't know much about it. There's an intent between absent-mindedness and criminality. Okay, they're not two equal things, or unintentionally doing something. And I go back and what you said, it's going to come out just this way. All of the email and the New York Times going nuts and the whole press, there was not one single classified thing on Secretary Clinton's email. Zero. None. You got to understand that. Whitewater, we said it was a deal that lost $47,000. I think it was $48,200. That was it. And yet they're going to do the same thing over and over again. And Democrats just need to say, we're cooperating fully. And look, everybody has a right to the Fifth Amendment. You don't have the right to work in this administration and take the Fifth Amendment. We want to get this thing done. We want to help this guy here because we know at the end of the day, there's nothing here.
Yeah, because at the end of the day, we could do a whole media segment on the idea of trying to be really aggressive when it's a Democrat to balance out what people feel like, well, maybe it's something unfair. No, Donald Trump really did the things. He really actually did the things. That's why we do these stories, not because we have something about Donald Trump. Anyway, Joyce Vance and James Carville, thank you very much.